Let's begin with the word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. We can again go into Daniel and look into another chapter, hopefully that will contribute to your exaltation as we open the fall of Babylon in the time of Belshazzar. May we know that you are not mocked and you will reign supreme and sovereign. So teach us to find your glory in this lesson, that we might be humbled before you, and in the same token be able to commit all of us ourselves to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So we continue our study of Daniel. We go into from arrogance to destruction. If you will recall the structure of Daniel, I think this is one of the better graphs that I found. This lays out the breakdown by language that was used. You will see that the first part was in Aramaic, chapters 2 to chapter 7. Aramaic, again, is like the English language today, which is more international. So this was meant for a global application. And chapters 1 and 8 to 12 were written in Hebrew, basically because it was meant for the Jewish people specifically. So with that bird's eye view, we go into the layout of Daniel's chapters. We said that there is a chiasm from 2 to 7, and then that's a historic chiasm, and there's a prophetic chiasm from 7 to 12, with chapter 7 being the hub of the book, because 7 is both history and prophecy. We will go, and this is a good outline given by the Bible Project. I highly recommend the Bible Project in terms of introduction to the books of the Bible and the outlines. Here's what they give in Daniel, the breakdown of the chapters. And again, you see Hebrew here, you see Aramaic for the middle chapters, and towards the end you got Hebrew again for the Jewish people. We covered the humiliation of Nebuchadnezzar last week. Now we will cover the destruction and the downfall of Belshazzar in chapter 5. Again, let me repeat the reason why Daniel has a chiasm is, I guess it's just the reverse. You will notice that the chronological order in Daniel, most of them are in reverse. And the reason for that is not so much the fact that Daniel was missing in terms of time sequence. Daniel basically followed the chiasm that will help us understand what he was trying to convey. King Belshazzar is mentioned in chapter 7 and chapter 8 of Daniel, okay? But he doesn't go into his destruction and his fall until chapter 5. So you see the 7 and 8, 5 is the reverse. So, and there's a reason for that. And we will review that before we go into the actual lesson for next week. Now, this is a graphics that I gave when we first looked at the introduction of Daniel, but this will help us understand the background of the story of King Belshazzar. You will see that Shalmaneser, these are the kings who are very ruthless, and it's amazing if you read the story of the Assyrian kings, they will skin you alive. In fact, Ashurbanipal, before the most powerful and brutal king during the time of Nahum, okay, actually going into Belshazzar and Nabonidus in our study today, he was so bad he will put a nation under siege and then allow the people, the inhabitants, to go hungry to the point where they will have to eat each other. Cannibalism was rampant. And like I said, after cannibalism is rampant, he will even go in there, grab the pieces of body parts and cook them, and then skin people alive. So this was something, but they're very powerful. They controlled most of the territories during the time. Okay, but remember what happened, as great as Assurbanipal was, somehow the Assyrian Empire went into a decline, and we have two weak kings, which is the first is Sinsariskun, who was killed in battle, the Battle of Nineveh in 612, and then Ashurbanipal, the last king, was defeated at Haran in 609 BC. Let's repeat that so you'll have an idea as to the context of Daniel 5. Remember, I highlighted this. This was the Babylonian battles against Assyria. And remember that the Medes collaborated with the Babylonians. So after they went into all the conquest here, they eventually went to Nineveh, and Nineveh fell in 612. So there was the one of the kings, like I told you, Sinsariskun was the king of Assyria then. He died in that battle. So after he died in that battle, what happened was they moved back. All the Assyrians moved back. They retreated into Haran. When they retreated into Haran, the Assyrians and the Medes pursued them to go over there. And remember, I told you that Pharaoh Necho II, went up to help the Assyrians. The reason for that was because Pharaoh Necho I were good friends with the Assyrians. So he said, okay, you're being attacked by the Medes and the Persians. I will lend you support. So Pharaoh Necho went all the way up to Haran to help defend the Assyrians against the Medes and the Neo-Babylonians. But you know what happened? It failed. They couldn't overcome the garrison that Nabonidus put in there. So at about 609 BC, Haran fell. And Haran fell in 609 BC, signifying the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And then you add 70 years to that, you end up in 539. That explains the 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah. But there's something very interesting here. I'd like to discuss this with you. One of the major edifices in Haran was the Temple of Sin, or the moon god Sin. And in the temple of Haran was a priestess. The priestess' name was Adagope. Adagope turns out to be the mother of Nabonidus, and we'll go there in a little while. Basically, what happened was the Temple of Sin was destroyed because of the invasion of the Assyrians and the Medes in Haran. After they defeated Nineveh, they went to Haran. And with that invasion, the Temple of Sin, or the moon god, was destroyed. But the priestess of the temple was Adagope. Somehow Nabonidus had a kind heart towards Adagope, and he even brought the religion of sin, the moon god, into Babylon. And according to some of the historians, they're surmising that somehow he also brought Adagope into Babylon to be the priestess of the moon god in Babylon. That's very important because of what Nabonidus does, and we'll go back to that in a little while. Meanwhile, let's look at this outline again to know the chronological flow. Okay, let's review what we've covered so far. Nabonidus was Neo-Babylonian, and Cyrus was Median. And Nabonidus said, in order for me to get rid of the Assyrians, I need somebody to partner with me, and there's got to be an alliance. So there was an alliance between Neo-Babylon and the Medes, and the reason that came to be was because Nabonidus decided to marry Prince Nebuchadnezzar to Amytis, who was the daughter of Cyrus. Okay? So because of this alliance, they were able to destroy the Assyrians. Okay. Meanwhile, Cyrus is another daughter. Her name was Astyages. And Astyages turned out to be the parent of Mandana, Prince Mandana. And Prince Mandana got married to Cyrus the Great. And we'll come to that in a little while. So here's what happened. After the conquest of the Assyrians and the Egyptians in Haran, okay, Nabonidus went back and then gave the command to his son Nebuchadnezzar, the legendary Neo-Babylonian king, probably the most powerful of the kings of Neo-Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar went to Carchemish to finish up what his dad started. He finishes up both the Egyptians and whatever remained of the Assyrian Empire in Carchemish in 605 BC. And right about 605 BC, he learns that Nabopolassar dies. So instead of him conquering all the way to Egypt, if you look at the map, from Haran, you will go down to Egypt. You will pass by the Holy Land, or Israel, or Judah. So instead of him just going back because his father died to claim the throne, Nebuchadnezzar said, I cannot go home without any booties, any proof that I won in the battle. So that's exactly what he did. He grabbed some of the loot from Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. They brought all of those captives into Babylon to prove his victory. Okay? And then we studied last week that Nebuchadnezzar became so proud, and because Nebuchadnezzar became so proud, God humbled him, and he eventually recognized who Yahweh was. The proof for this in the archaeological studies is that in that 7 or 8 year period, all the records of the Babylonian regime, there were a lot of details, but no mention of Nebuchadnezzar is given in that 7 or 8 period, which testimony, even it's an argument against in silence, is that Nebuchadnezzar somehow got sick based on their study. Okay? Eventually, Nebuchadnezzar dies, and evil Merodach, Amel-Marduk, that's another name, evil Merodach, his son took over. You will read the reference 2 Kings 25:27, because it was this king who was kind to Jehoiakim, one of the last kings of Judah. Again, after in the exile, he was giving good treatment. This king ruled for about 2 years. After he ruled for 2 years, Neriglissar took over. Neriglissar was married to one of the daughters of Nebuchadnezzar, and because of the marriage, he acceded to the throne. And then there was a son, Labashi-Marduk of evil Merodach, who came to the throne about 10 years old. When he was only 10 years old, he was really a bad king. He didn't even last for a year. Neriglissar took over. And then after another series of coup d'etat, Nabonidus also married to Nitocris, one of the daughters of Nebuchadnezzar, took over the kingdom, and then he had the son called Belshazzar, and Belshazzar became the co-regent. Let's expand on this some more. These are the breakdowns of the kings. I thought I gave this during our intro to Daniel. You got Nabopolassar, okay? Nebuchadnezzar comes into the picture. Amel-Marduk comes in, and then Neriglissar comes in, which is the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar. He murdered Amel-Marduk in order to take over the throne via marriage. And then Labashi-Marduk, which is the son of Neriglissar, murdered after deemed unfit to rule. And then Nabonidus eventually comes into the picture. This is the breakdown of the genealogy and the hierarchy, so you'll have a better picture. You start with Nabopolassar, the first king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Then Nebuchadnezzar comes into being, the golden years of Babylon. And then the 4 years that followed was very tumultuous for the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Amel-Marduk comes in. After 2 years, okay, he was assassinated, and the daughter married Neriglissar of Nebuchadnezzar. So Neriglissar takes over Labashi-Marduk, then for less than a year. And eventually, a daughter, or Nitocris, I think, was the name of the daughter, married Nabonidus, and Nabonidus took over and gave the kingdom rule to Belshazzar. Okay, now let's explain what's going on with Nabonidus, because if you read ancient history, Nabonidus is the last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But you read the Bible, the last king to die for Neo-Babylonia is Belshazzar. So we'll try to figure out what was going on there. The ruins of Elul, the temple of the moon god Sin in Haran, we talked about this. This is a sample, and you will notice that the temple had the priestess named Adagope of the moon god Sin. So there's the moon god Sin, and there was a priestess in Haran during the battle between the Assyrians, the Medes, and the Neo-Babylonians. Adagope turns out to be the mother of Nabonidus. And I told you, because Nabopolassar conquered Haran, he took Adagope back to Babylon so that Babylon will become the priestess of the temple of sin, or the temple of the moon god in Neo-Babylonia. So there are two gods we're dealing with here. The moon god Sin on a temple-like throne. This is one of the excavation. And now the chief god Marduk's symbol is the snake dragon. Okay, this is the symbol of Marduk. And Marduk is the chief god of the Babylonians. You got to understand, Marduk was like Jupiter, okay, and Zeus in terms of the Greeks and the Romans. Okay. Now here was what was going on. When Nabonidus ascended to the throne of Neo-Babylonia, because his mom was priestess of the moon god Sin, Nabonidus said, I'm going to replace the religion of Babylon with the moon god Sin, the worship of Sin. I will replace Marduk. That didn't bode too well among the Babylonians. That's why they began to hate who Nabonidus was. Okay? And this is a further detail of what happens. There is a festival happening in Chaldea, which is the Chaldean New Year in Babylonia. It's called an Akitu Festival. And the Akitu Festival is a 12-day festival where they have their massive processions. Okay? This is very elaborate. They go to the Ishtar Gate and then all the way to the temple of Marduk. Okay? And the way it goes is, about the 4th or 5th day of the festival, the king is supposed to go to the priest of Marduk. And the priest will strip the king of his crown, of his robe, so that he becomes a common man. And the last thing that happens is the priest will give the king a very hard slap in the face. The reason why he does that is so that the king will be humble and admit all his shortcomings the previous year and prove that he is humble enough to serve the people and will be fit to be king. All right, so you put yourself in the shoes of Nabonidus, who was already biased towards the god of his mom, the moon god Sin, and then the Akitu festival. So I'm going to go there to be slapped by the priest of Marduk, and I don't believe in Marduk. I believe in the god of Sin. So you know what he did? He took off. He never celebrated the Akitu festival. The reason why they couldn't celebrate the Akitu festival was only when the king is present can the Akitu festival be celebrated. But because Nabonidus took off, spent 10 years away from Babylon, they weren't able to celebrate the Akitu festival. That's why they hated the gods of Nabonidus, all the Babylonians. Okay? This is the Esagila, the Tower of Babel, a temple to the god of Marduk. That's where Nebuchadnezzar brought all the temple vessels from Jerusalem. And in the same token, this is where Marduk is being worshipped. It is south of the Yud, Ziggurat, and Temenaki that seem to reach to the heavens. Okay, that's if you go to Babylon before. And that's why you have the Tower of Babel. They're saying that was a replica of the Tower of Babel. Here's some maps that will help you understand the background further. Nabonidus was not too bad of a general. He conquers Cilicia and Edom to prove to his people that somehow he was a great warrior. But despite the fact that he conquered Cilicia and Edom, in this particular case, the Babylonians were not impressed because they're very religious people and they were dedicated to Marduk. And here comes a king who wants to overthrow Marduk and replace Marduk with a moon god. And then for some reason, according to historical records, Nabonidus went from Babylon to Tema in Arabia, about 485 miles southwest. Why? Nabonidus chose to exile himself from the city in the northern Arabian desert oasis of Tema or Tema. He appoints his son Belshazzar to rule Babylon. So you got to understand what's going on here. Nabonidus is the duly enthroned king of Babylon. But because of this religious conflict with the Babylonians, there were so much misgivings between the two parties. He decides not to be in Babylon, instead goes to Tema. And when he goes to Tema, he leaves Belshazzar to reign or to rule in Babylon. Okay? And we'll probably come to the biblical evidence of that, which you remember the promise of Belshazzar to Daniel when he interpreted the writing on the wall that he will be the third ruler. He wasn't the second ruler. He's the third ruler because the second ruler was Belshazzar. First ruler was Nabonidus. Okay, so here's what happened. After the conquest of Haran, okay, Adagope, the mother of Nabonidus, was taken to Babylon to be the priestess over there. And when Nabonidus became the king of Babylon, there was another alliance between Babylon and the Persians. Okay, and the alliance between Babylon and the Persians was basically Nabonidus and Cyrus. Okay, and we'll cover that some more in a little while. But basically, according to Adagope, the mother of Nabonidus, Nabonidus can only be king according to a dream that she had if he is able to rebuild the temple of the moon god Sin in Haran. And Nabonidus said, yes, ma'am, I had the same dreams. So he went into an exploit. By having an exploit, he told Cyrus, let's collaborate with each other and let's go against the leader of Haran. And the leader of Haran was Cyrus. And as we discussed, Cyrus was the grandfather of Cyrus the Great. Okay? And because the Medes, after the conquest of Haran and Nineveh, was given the northern part, okay, and the Neo-Babylonian went to the southern part, it was Cyrus who was actually the king and the ruler of Haran over here. So what Nabonidus did was he collaborated with Cyrus and they defeated Cyrus here. And he was able to rebuild the temple of Haran over there. Okay, and I'll tell you the story. It will be very interesting how they tried to kill Cyrus and he eventually won. We kind of covered this in Esther and Nehemiah, but we will review that somehow. There's a stela of Haran, a stele. It is like a tombstone or some big stone that allows us to go to some historical records. The stela of Haran says, Nabonidus conquered in 552 6 oases in northwest Arabia, including Tema. So basically, Nabonidus was going to Arabia to conquer Arabia as well, into the southern kingdom. And part of the conquest of the 6 oases was Tema. That's where Nabonidus stayed for about 10 years. Okay, there's another archaeological find which is very, very important to understanding the historical background of Daniel 5. It's the Nabonidus Chronicle. Nabonidus Chronicle said that Nabonidus delegated rulership of Babylon to his son Belshazzar while settling in Tema for 10 years. Okay? You got to understand. Since Nabonidus was not in Babylon for 10 years, he was not in Babylon, he was in in Tema in Saudi Arabia, which was about 500 miles from Babylon. They needed the ruler in Babylon. He was relegated to Belshazzar. So Belshazzar was reigning when Nabonidus was away. All right, so let's see exactly where the setting of Daniel 5 is. After the collaboration between Cyrus and Nabonidus, Cyrus went into a rampage of all the territories north of Babylon. And he kept on winning left and right to the point that he was even conquering some of the colonies of Babylon. So he went directly against Babylon, against Nabonidus. So there were three battles that happened, and the three battles that happened gave way to the conquest of Babylon and the fall of Babylon under Belshazzar. Okay, we have the battle of Opis, the battle of Sippar, and the battle of Babylon. So Nabonidus and Cyrus met each other in Opis. You can read this in historical records. There was a big battle there. And of course, Cyrus won the battle. Then if you read the records in Sippar and Babylon, according to them, Sippar was captured without battle. And Gubaru, governor of Gutium, entered Babylon without a fight. So there was a big fight in Opis, but somehow Cyrus, the Persians, conquered Shepar and Babylon without putting up a fight. Nobody died, okay? So the first explanation of why Shepar was given up without the fight was because a lot of the Babylonians hated Nabonidus because of the religious conflict between the moon god Sin and the sun god Marduk. So instead of siding with Babylon, they rebelled against Nabonidus. And that one of the reasons why Nabonidus, there was a big massacre of the Babylonians here. In fact, you have a war against another nation, and you're killing your own people. That was what happened here. Because they hated Nabonidus. They didn't put up a fight. They just surrendered somehow to the Persian. That was what happened in Shepar. Now our story becomes more fascinating because the next battle of these three last battles of the Persians against the Neo-Babylonians was in Babylon. And it's saying Gubaru, who was the governor of Gutium, entered Babylon without a fight. According to historical records, Gubaru was in charge of the command during Belshazzar's banquet. It was not until 17 days that Cyrus actually went and conquered Babylon. But this is what happened. They entered Babylon without a fight. You know, the story we'll cover that in a little while. They couldn't penetrate the walls of Babylon, so they had to divert the river Euphrates, and they went under the river to go into the feasting leaders of the empire. And by doing so, they were able to kill Belshazzar, and Neo-Babylon fell. The question was, there was a big wall that was so thick, it was impenetrable, virtually impenetrable from any nation. But once you go and traverse that wall, there were inner walls with gates into Babylon itself. So not because you cross the walls, you're already in. You cannot be in until you're able to enter the gates. And a lot of the people conjectures, because they hated Nabonidus and Belshazzar, you know what they did? Those people who were not part of the banquet, they opened up the gates in the inner walls so that the Assyrians were able to go in, and they conquered Babylon. So all of these facts are very fascinating, but the bottom line is it will only testify to the accuracy of the biblical record, as Daniel wrote it in Daniel 5. Cyrus Cylinder is the third very important document that was found in archaeology to support the story behind Daniel. I returned to the sacred cities on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been ruins for a long time. The images which used to live therein established for them a permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all their former inhabitants and returned them to their habitations. See, the prophecy was that after 70 years, Babylon's going to fall, and God will raise Cyrus. 50 years before Cyrus was born, it was already predicted in Isaiah that he will be a chosen one, a Messiah that will deliver the people, that will bring them back and restore their sanctuary. That was the decree of Cyrus that made that happen. We studied that lengthily in our quarter for Ezra and Nehemiah. This is the timeline that we covered. There were 3 invasions of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, okay? 606, 597, and 587 BC. And then we covered Amel-Marduk, we saw Neriglissar, we see Nabonidus and Belshazzar at the back end. So 609 was when Assyria fell under the Medes and the Neo-Babylonians. So Babylon's rule begins in 609, and it lasted for 70 years until it fell in 539 BC during the reign of Belshazzar. And you know what happens after the fall of Babylon? Cyrus, the Great, the Medo-Persian ruler, decreased the return of the Jews to Jerusalem, and he rebuilt the temple in 536. This whole land shall become a ruin and waste, and this nation shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So a lot of the prophetic timeline says it was like, let me go back here. They date it from 606 to 536 because they said the first invasion of Nebuchadnezzar was 606, and 536 was when the people actually returned to Jerusalem. But if you look at the verse in Jeremiah, it's got nothing to do with the Jewish people. It is actually saying that this nation shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. It's about Babylon. And because it's about Babylon, Jeremiah is saying, I'm giving Babylon 70 years. And when Babylon falls, Cyrus, who's the leader of the next empire, will take my people back to where they are and rebuild the temple. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. Okay. Aside from the fall of Babylon, Jeremiah talks about the restoration of God's people to their homeland. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. We read it in Ezra 1:2. So this is right about the time after Belshazzar fell in the story of Daniel. And I'd like to put it in this perspective. We're talking about the temple, and when we talk about the temple, we talk about worship. So you have the temple that was built in the wilderness, built at God's direction by Moses, and then Solomon builds the grandest temple of all, which is Solomon's temple, and then it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. It was rebuilt, but not as glorious in 516. And then you have Zerubbabel, okay, his temples, and Herod's temple in the end. We covered all of this in Ezra and Nehemiah before. So here's the historical chiasm. The first chiasm in Daniel, which is chapters 2 to 7. You see the vision of God's kingdom, which is actually the image, the big image, and the vision of the kingdoms in chapter 7, which are the beast. And then you have the trial of God's people. You have the fire furnace in chapter 3. And next week we'll be studying about the trial of God's people in the lines then Daniel was being persecuted. And remember, we studied in a chiasm, the main point of the chiasm is at the center, which is like the conclusion. It's not at the end. And the center of the first chiasm in Daniel is the exaltation of God. So how is God exalted in chapter 4? He is exalted in chapter 4 because Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, and he eventually learned who God was, and there was the conversion of Nebuchadnezzar in the end. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, Belshazzar rebelled against God. And because he was very obstinate, he was judged. But the judgment also resulted in the exaltation of God. So that's the chiasm. So you wonder why Daniel put chapter 5 before writing chapter 6 in chapter 7, chapter 7, chapter 8, okay, where he had the vision, because he was following the chiasm. The chiasm basically tries to tell you that God must be exalted above all other gods. And in this particular story, we got both Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar exalting God, one through conversion, the other to judgment and his fall. So God is exalted to the judgment of a king is what we cover in our lesson for this week. I had a series on the Christ of Daniel. You can probably find it in YouTube. Unfortunately, for those who are watching who are not Filipinos, I gave that in Hope Channel in Taglish, so you might not be able to understand some of the Filipino Tagalog language that I use. Nevertheless, all the slides will be there. You can watch YouTube, look for the Christ of Daniel, and the entire book of Daniel is covered by the presentation. So since it's the Christ of Daniel in this particular study, I entitled the chapter study, The Inviolable Christ of Daniel. So the inviolable Christ of Daniel is you're going to violate Christ in your decadence. Okay? So King Belshazzar made the great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of 1,000. So you're talking at least 1,000 leaders, political leaders, during the time of Belshazzar was in a feast. Okay? Remind me, we'll go back and tell you exactly why the feast was there. I think William Shea gave one of the best explanations to that. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple of Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. So it wasn't just the leaders. Families, they're there. The wives were there. And they drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. You got to understand this. It was already sacrilegious. There was like a blasphemous act of bringing the articles of the temple of the Jews, from the temple of Marduk, so they can drink from this. While they were having their orgies, they were having this decadent banquet. And aside from bringing in the articles, the vessels of God, of Yahweh, while drinking, they worship other gods. To add insult to injury, there was just like an in-your-face sin, a high-handed sin. Just to have an idea, if you read Ezra 1:9-11, when these articles of the temple were returned, so the inventory was 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, 29 silver pans, 30 gold bowls, 410 duplicate silver balls, 1,000 miscellaneous items. Altogether, there were 5,400 gold and silver articles that was moved by Nebuchadnezzar from Judah all the way to Babylon. This was brought in by Belshazzar during the decadent and the blasphemous banquet that he did. Malcolm Margaret says this: the depravity of men is at once the most empirically verifiable reality, but at the same time the most intellectually resisted fact. I pressed this some more, so there'll be some relevance in our study. Forbes magazine, in their Diamond edition, the 75th anniversary, commissioned about 16 scholars and journalists to answer one question. The question that was posted was, why do Americans feel so bad when they've got it so good? And all the articles, including Peggy Noonan, speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, Sayo Bello, Saul Bello, Henry Louis Gates, Alfred Kazin, all these guys who wrote this came into one conclusion. The conclusion was, it's a moral mess. It's a cultural mess in America. We don't have values anymore. We don't have settings. Nobody knows what's right and wrong anymore in America. That's why we're having problems. How does the Bible substantiate that? In Ecclesiastes 12:13-14, after all this, there is only one thing to say: have reverence for God and obey His commands, because this is all that we were created for. Notice that, because this is all that we were created for. The very purpose of man is to worship God, says Solomon. After researching what it means to be happy with all the resources that he had, he said, everything is vanity. Let's conclude the whole matter. The whole matter is that we should reverence God. We should worship God alone. That's the only way to be happy and find true meaning in life, because that's what we're created for. God is going to judge everything we do, whether good or bad, even things done in secret. So obey His commands. He's talking about the moral base of the kingdom of God. As soon as you get rid of that, based on the research of the Diamond Anniversary of Forbes magazine, you lose meaning, you lose purpose in life. And you lose happiness at the same token. There's no fulfillment, like Solomon says. Okay, Thomas Nagel is one of the renowned New York University professor known for his atheism. He said, it isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. So we have the big debate on atheism. Why do people say there's no God? And they say that religion is an escape. It's a cop-out. You don't want to think. Therefore, because you don't want to think, you believe in God. Okay? The God of the gaps. Well, Fyodor Dostoevsky says, if there's no God, everything is permitted. That's why Thomas Nagel says, I don't want to be there to be a God, because if there is a God, I won't be able to do the immoral things that I'm trying to do. Because if there's no God, there's no morality, I can do practically what I want to do. That's why decadence begins the moment you deny the existence of God. There was a bisexual Brazilian composer and singer. His name was Cazuza. During one of his concerts, he puffed out some smoke into the air and said, God, that's for you. He died a horrible death and painful death shortly thereafter at the age of 32 from AIDS. Reminds me of Herod in Acts 12:22-23. When the people were shouting the voice of God and not of a man, immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. Herod was a good orator. As a ruler, he was schooled in Grecian rhetorics, and because he was good in oratory, he delivered a very powerful speech, and they thought God was already speaking, and he claimed the glory for himself. And you know what happened? He breathed his last, and he was tragically judged by God. A lot of people may be able to get away with it today, a lot of atheists and a lot of agnostics in the world today. But you cannot get away from the meaninglessness and the lack of fulfillment that comes with the absence of God in your life and in your value system. You cannot violate Christ even in decadence and the denial of God. Second point is you cannot violate Christ in your delusion. The story continues. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. And the king's color changed and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together. It was so scary. It's one of the most terrifying picture you can read in the Old Testament. The king, who was just having a decadent time, just enjoying the orgies with 1,000 of his leaders, and with their families and their wives, his colors changed. You know, in the vernacular in our country, say namutla. You know, his tail turned pale, turned like a dead man, and his thoughts alarmed him. He was so scared. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together. They always described it. He was so scared his knees were clapping because he was shaking in fright and in terror. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall. And the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change." Who? Now we come into the picture of a queen. Who's this queen? That's the question. Okay, if you look at the diagram I gave you, this queen happens to be the queen mother of Nabonidus, possibly in Autocrates. And the reason why I say that is because this queen knew of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? He says, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, made him chief of the magicians." So there was some guesswork. They say Adagope, the mother of Nabonidus on the Assyrian side, was the queen. Yeah, but she was the priestess of the moon god Sin and would have not known about Yahweh. So there must be another queen, another daughter of Nebuchadnezzar who knew about Daniel and Yahweh, and that must have been the queen talking here that Daniel is mentioning in Daniel 5:11. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So he's in a quandary. Belshazzar couldn't understand what the words were, and because he couldn't understand the words, he was desperate and looking for somebody who can interpret what was written on the wall. And the queen shows up and says, "Hey, there's one man in your kingdom who was able to interpret this. There were dreams that nobody could interpret except for the gods, and this man was able to do it, so-called Daniel." Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." So this is very important. Why is he the third ruler in the kingdom? We already covered this in the historical context. He's the third ruler because there were actually two rulers in the kingdom at this point. Nabonidus was in Tema for so many years, and he didn't want to rule Babylon because of the religious conflict with his people. Instead, they allowed Belshazzar to be ruler of Babylon. So when Belshazzar promised almost everything that the guy will be able to interpret the writing of the wall, he said, "You will be the third ruler, not the second ruler," because there are already two rulers in Babylon. So notice the details of the biblical account and how accurate it is based on the historical background that we covered. And Daniel was saying, "Are you delusional? You'll be dead tonight. You're promising me things. I can't get anything from you. You're basically dead meat. Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness. But when his heart was lifted up, he was brought down from his kingly throne and his glory was taken from him." So he goes back to Daniel 4. He tells Belshazzar, "Nebuchadnezzar, okay, your grandfather was great, okay? But he was put down by God so he could understand who God was, and he humbled himself. He was driven from among men. He studied this. He became like a beast until he knew the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And this is the tragic part. Nebuchadnezzar learned his lesson, and God was exalted through his humiliation. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but you have lifted yourself against the Lord of heaven. This is amazing, the insight that you have in this verse. Because Belshazzar and Nabonidus was there when this was happening to Nebuchadnezzar. They knew exactly what was going on, but they did not take heed of how Yahweh moved to Daniel and what was going on. And you have praised the gods. Instead of praising Yahweh, you praise the gods. Despite the fact that Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that Yahweh is the only God to be praised, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and his writing was inscribed, and this is the writing from that was inscribed. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Okay? This is the meaning. It says, Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. If you're interested, this is the Aramaic version of the writings on the wall. And these are the descriptions. Mene or mina are 60 shekels. Okay, mene, mene, tekel or shekel, to weigh, okay? And then to break down is the last part. So mene says, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. It's 26. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. It's what he's saying is, there's many. These are values of coins, of coinage in the system, the Middle Eastern system. And mina, okay, he said mina is a value system, and if you weigh it, it becomes shekels, and then upharsin is to break it apart. I like the way Bruce Gore, and give his name, if you can Google Bruce Gore, he'll give you a lot of historical background for Daniel. He was saying, if you were to translate that today, it is almost like dollar, quarter, nickel. That's what mene, mene, tekel, upharsin means. Dollar means, hey, you think your kingdom is worth a lot of dollars? Very soon, you will be quartered. And after you're quartered, your kingdom will be broken down, and I won't even give a nickel for it. That's what the play on words was. But this was a message from God, basically telling Belshazzar, tonight, your kingdom will fall and will be taken by the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. The chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. It's amazing, his knees are clapping against each other. He knew that he violated God. He desecrated all the vessels. And he was still thinking about his throne, thinking about his reign. The guy was really delusional. So apply this. Well, John Lennon said Christianity will end, it will disappear. I do not have to argue about that. I am certain Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. The Beatles are more famous than him. And you know what happened, right? He's going to his pad in New York, and somebody stalked him, Mark David Chapman, and killed John Lennon. And after John Lennon was killed, of course, Mark David Chapman said, hey, I'm more famous than John Lennon is now. You think you're more famous than Jesus? All right, so this is how delusional men can be. Tancredo Neves. Okay? Tancredo Neves is, he ran for president. And after he ran for president, this is what he said while he was running for president. If I get 500 electoral votes from my party, not even God could remove me from the presidency. All right? What happened? During the campaign, he fell gravely ill on the eve of his inauguration, March 14, 1985, and died 39 days after and never assumed his position as president. See how, however powerful you are, the delusion of men that he's greater than God is always there, haunting him, and yet, in the final analysis, God is sovereign. You cannot violate him. Okay, you guys, everybody knows this. May 31, 1911, they built supposedly the largest ocean liner available to the world. This was before the advent of airplanes. So you ride the boat. This was the White Star Line at the launch of the Titanic. Not even God himself could sink the ship. That's what they said. You know what happened? The Titanic carried over 3,000 passengers when it was sunk by an iceberg. More than 1,517 passengers lost their lives on April 15, 1912, and only 706 survived. Not even God can sink the Titanic. One more. The daughter of Stalin gave this story to Malcolm Muggeridge. And she said, as Stalin lay dying, plagued with terrifying hallucinations, he suddenly sat halfway up in bed, clenched his fist toward the heavens once more, fell back upon his pillow. He was dead. Bible says, God is not mocked. For whatever you sow, that you will reap. What's really tragic is that a lot of these things that men saw are sown in delusion, thinking that you can be greater than God, when in fact you're only the creature, you're not the creator. So you cannot violate Christ in your decadence, you cannot violate Christ in delusion, and lastly, you cannot violate Christ in your downfall. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and hope. A very popular text. Everybody quotes this for their lives. The context is not about the lives of people today. The context is about the people of God taken into captivity in Babylon. I have plans for you. I will bring you back. You rebuild your temple. You will be built as a people again, so that the Messiah will come. And how will this happen? Nearly 150 years before Cyrus' birth, God declared through the prophet Isaiah that the man named Cyrus would be the anointed shepherd of his people and rebuild Jerusalem. Of all the personages in the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's only one other name outside of Jesus Christ who was called the Messiah, and that was the name of Cyrus, who says to the deep, be dry, I will dry up your rivers. Cyrus was right then, I have grass to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. Notice this was written by Isaiah over 100 years before Cyrus was born, even before what happened to Belshazzar. Okay, so let's understand what Isaiah's prophecy is all about. Babylon surpasses in splendor and city in the known world, says Herodotus. Babylon had 53 temples, 155 small sanctuaries, and 384 street altars, all of them within the city confines. Herodotus claimed that the outer walls were 56 miles in length, 80 feet thick, and 320 feet high. Wide enough, he said, to allow 2 4-horse chariots to pass each other. Can you imagine how thick the walls were? You can go and race 2 4-horse chariots. Man, that's wide. But about 2-3 cars will fit in there. How can you penetrate that kind of a wall? That's why they're saying Belshazzar was just standing there looking at Cyrus' Persian army because they tried to get me. You can't get me. You got these thick walls. You see, they also had inner walls, which were not so thick as the first, but hardly less strong. There were inner walls and there were outer walls, okay? And according to the records, they had enough supply in Babylon to last them for 10 years. There's what the term called siege during the battles in history. When somebody lays siege of a particular country or particular territory, what the king does is surrounds that city. And once the city is surrounded, they cannot go out, they cannot get supplies, and they die. Remember, we talk about this when Julius Caesar, okay, laid siege on one of the Germanic tribes, and they had to surrender because they had no supplies. They were dying of hunger. According to historical records, you can surround Babylon, but they were good for 10 years. They have enough supply. They didn't have to go out. They were self-supporting. The river Euphrates was there, and all the production that they needed to sustain the lives of the people. So let's go back to the story about King Astyages. King Astyages dreamed that out of his daughter flowed the stream that flooded all of Asia. His interpreters told him that his pregnant daughter's son would overthrow his rule. So what King Astyages does is he weds his daughter to Mandana, the princess Mandana, to a Persian king Cambyses, to isolate her from his kingdom. They say, okay, Umay, you got some weird dreams. I don't want you to be staying here in the Median territory. Let me marry you to the Persians. Okay, maybe you will not do any harm there. So marry to Cambyses to isolate it from his kingdom. And then when a baby was born, so babies of Mandana and Cambyses, it happens to be Cyrus, King Astyages hands over Cyrus, the baby, to his servant Harpagus and told him to kill his daughter's child. I want to be king. If he's supposed to be king according to the dream, then kill him so he doesn't become king. But Harpagus could not bring himself to kill the child and instead give Cyrus to a shepherd, Mithridates, and his wife to kill. But the shepherds didn't have the heart, and they were unwilling to kill Cyrus either. So you know what happened, right? I'll give you the rest of the story. So what they did was, this Mithridates and his wife had a stillborn child. So what Harpagus did was, they got the stillborn child, and he brought them back to the king and said, this is Cyrus, this is dead, the stillborn child, while they were rearing Cyrus up. Well, the bottom line was Cyrus grew up, and then he was found out because he killed one of the men who went against him, and they finally detected that he was of royal blood. And when the king learned about Astyages, learned about Cyrus, they brought him back to the kingdom. Of course, the king was angry with Harpagus. He did not punish him right away. What he did was he got the son of Harpagus and killed his son and chopped his son. And then he called a banquet, invited Harpagus. Unbeknownst to him, part of the delicacy that was being served that night was his own son. So Harpagus couldn't forget this. So he hated the guts of Astyages. So what did he do? He basically said, let's go against Astyages so that I can have my revenge. This is a story I gave you. Right about this time, Nabonidus from Babylon says, okay, I want to rebuild the temple of sin in Haran. And the way to do that is to topple the king of Haran, who is in charge of Haran, Astyages. Okay, so he said, Cyrus, I will go to battle with you. So Nabonidus and Cyrus were in alliance to go against Astyages. What complicated the whole thing was Astyages sent Harpagus in command of his army. But in the middle of the battle, Astyages defected and went to join Cyrus and Nabonidus. And that defeated Astyages. So the Median Empire fell into the hands of Cyrus. And all of a sudden, there was a Medo-Persian Empire united under the rulership and kingship of Cyrus. So when all of them are put to shame and confounded, the makers of idols go on fishing together. To me, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall swear allegiance. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 60 years old. Okay, we will spend a little time here to understand this, because we don't have Cyrus, we have Darius here. How do you explain the fact that it was Cyrus who took over Neo-Babylonia, when in fact Darius is mentioned by Daniel? Okay, there's a quick explanation to this. Before that, though, while Cyrus was doing his rampage against the territories close to Babylon, he started building canals connecting to the river Euphrates. Okay, he was, remember I told you before in the study of Esther and Nehemiah that the Persians were excellent maritime engineers. So basically, the way they were able to penetrate the kingdom of Babylon, despite the thickness of the walls, was they diverted the water, okay, of the Euphrates, which went directly into the middle of Babylon, and until it went to about knee-deep, where all the Persian soldiers were able to wade under the walls of Babylon, they were able to go in. Okay, there were still inner walls. How were they able to get in? There were a lot of defectors within Babylon who left the walls open, and that night they killed Belshazzar. All right. Why is Darius mentioned rather than Cyrus? There are a couple texts that is mentioned. If you go to Isaiah 13:17, Isaiah 13:17 basically tells us who will be conquering. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. So Isaiah was saying, hey, the Babylon will fall. Well, the prediction of Babylon. But he's going to engineer the fall of Babylon. It's going to be the Medians. There's another text in Jeremiah 51, 11 and 28. So Jeremiah 51, 11, this is the fall of Babylon, the prophecy. Sharpen the arrows, take up the shields. The Lord has stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, because his purpose concerning Babylon is to destroy it, for that is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance for his temple. Right? And then verse 28, still the prophecy about the fall of Babylon, it says, prepare the nations for war against her, the kings of the Medes with their governors and deputies in every land. So basically, the prophecy of Isaiah about Cyrus says that the Medes will conquer Babylon. But Cyrus, supposedly, according to history, was Persian. But that's not really true. Remember, Cyrus has Persian and Median blood because of Cyrus. We talk about this, okay? And he was married to Mandana. So basically, Cyrus was also Median, okay? And because Cyrus was also Median, he was both Median and Persian. And that will still be consistent with Isaiah. And Daniel 6:28, if you go to Daniel 6:28, Daniel 6:28 basically says, this is the interesting verse, I think, which will provide a very good explanation. It says, so this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay? People don't notice this, but here's a good solution to the problem. Okay? Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is like a repetition of a title, okay? The reign of Darius, also the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So you got Darius the Mede, you got Cyrus the Persian. Both Darius the Mede and Cyrus are one and the same person. So, but because Daniel thought of the passages in Isaiah and Jeremiah, he wanted to be consistent with the prophecy of Isaiah and Jeremiah. He introduced the conqueror of Babylon as Darius the Mede. But Darius the Mede was actually Cyrus the Persian. And by looking at it that way, that resolves this issue, okay, that Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. If I can remember my math here, supposedly Cyrus was still able to reign about another 8 years, okay, 8 years when he conquered Babylon. And 8 years means he died about 70 years old. So between 70 years and 8 years, that's about 62 years old when he conquered Babylon. So the same God. Then another thing that's very important, why in the world did Belshazzar have a banquet? Okay, I told you that the battle of Opis, of Sippar and Babylon. Supposedly, although Nabonidus didn't say in Babylon, he did not give the rulership, the kingship of Babylon to Belshazzar. One of the arguments against that, the festival, the Akitu festival, was never celebrated, even if Belshazzar was supposed to be king, because Belshazzar was not really king. And the Akitu festival wanted the king to be the main character in the Akitu festival. So Belshazzar was not really king. But Belshazzar, 2 days before the conquest of Babylon, learned that there was a battle where Nabonidus, his dad, was engaged in, and he was soundly defeated. And you know what happened? Nabonidus ran away. He retreated. So he somehow, it's like a dog with his tail between his legs, ran back. So Belshazzar said, that's not good. The king of Babylon's running away. Are we just giving up the kingdom now? So he had to proclaim himself king. And look at that delusion of Belshazzar. He said, I want to be king now. My dad is no longer king. I will be king. Okay? And I don't care about how great Cyrus is. He cannot penetrate the walls of Babylon. And that's the story of Daniel 5. And you know what happened, how God used Cyrus to do that. But that's the reason why he had a very special banquet, inviting 1,000 of the leaders of Babylonia, because he wanted to actually declare himself king. And that's the background. Daniel 5. This is explained by the book of William Shea entitled Daniel Reader's Guide. One of the best books you can probably purchase. William Shea is Mr. Chiasm in Adventism. You look for William Shea, S-H-E-A, William, S-H-E-A, Daniel, okay, a Reader's Guide, explains this thoroughly in the documentation in Daniel 5. All right, I kind of put this in the slides that I'd put together before. It was the cell phone throwing contest. In Finland, they have some weird contests all over the world. In this particular, and they have contests on who can carry his wife, fastest. So they give you a world championship for the wife carrier. In this particular case, there was a contest in how far you can throw a cell phone, an old cell phone. So that's the guy who won, the champion. He threw the cell phone far enough. I'm putting this in. It's right about the time they were doing this championship bout against the cell phone. Manny Pacquiao was also having a bout. Of course, Manny Pacquiao won. There's a big difference between Manny Pacquiao's bout and the bout of throwing the cell phones. The big difference is if you are watching the wrong battle, the wrong fight, you will not appreciate what the real thing is about. What am I trying to say? If the fight that you're looking at in your life is a fight that you're doing, and the fight among men, or the fight for the impeachment of the President of the United States, the fight between the Democrats and the Republicans, you're missing the contest. The contest is between Christ and Satan, and how Christ will eventually win. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance. It is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross. And you can study the Bible all you want and pontificate on all the historical nitty-gritty details of what you have. But if you miss the cross of Jesus Christ, you shall have missed everything. Adrian Rogers, the late great preacher, Baptist Convention, says, you may choose your sin, but you cannot choose the consequences of your sin. How true. And if you understand that in the light of what we're studying now, that you cannot violate Christ in your decadence, in your delusion, and in your downfall, you can choose your sin, all right, because you're free. But those sins can have consequences. God's sovereignty will kick in, and you will know that you're going to choose the consequences of your sins, because there's a consequence for whatever you do. I was in the Philippines when the strongest storm to make landfall in recorded history tore to the country at speeds of 195 miles per hour, leaving more than 6,300 dead. This is like Typhoon Haiyan, international name, code name. The code name in the Philippines was Typhoon Yolanda. You look at how big this tornado is. It ran through the Visayas in the central Philippines, particularly Iloilo, and tore through the Philippines. And the governor was saying it was one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to us. We were there in Manila, but we were in the northern part of Manila. Yet we were somewhere here in Manila when this was going on. But despite the fact that we were far from the center, we could still feel the winds where we were. I was so bad, I told this story before, that when I went to the union office in Manila, there was this volunteer nurse from the Adventist Medical Center who went to Iloilo because it was impossible virtually by any planes, any modes of transportation. They were transported by a military plane. And when they stayed in the mission office, they said there was only a wall dividing them, separating them from a lot of dead bodies who were rotting. So they were there to pick up the dead bodies. That's how bad, because they found most of the dead bodies they found were hanging in trees. That's how bad this cyclone was that hit the Philippines. Well, it's nothing compared to what happened to the flood of Noah. I thought I had the quote here, but Ellen White quotes in Patriarchs and Prophets, where was Satan when the floods was raging during the time of Noah? He was, according to Ellen White, he was hanging in midair. He was fearing for his own life. And when God's judgment was finally executed among the wickedness of men, not even the devil can stand against the judgment. He was fearful of his own life. That's why Hebrews 2:3 says, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? Cast away from you all the transgressions that you have committed and make yourselves a new heart and a new spirit. Why will you die, O house of Israel? For I have no pleasure in the death of anyone, declares the Lord God. So turn and live. So that's my last slide for our study. Proverbs 18:10 says, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runs into it and is safe. Belshazzar thought that the walls of Babylon was enough to protect him and to make him secure. But his decadence and his delusion led to his downfall. He never recognized who God was. But the promise of God's word is, regardless of what's going to happen, the Lord will be your strong tower. The righteous will run into it and is safe. There's a story, this is the picture of us coming back from the Philippines when we did the crusade in Manila during the Philippines for Christ. And Lily ran to me in the airport to greet me and gave me the longest hug I've had from a grandkid. And I'm telling you, with Lily hugging me, there's no way anyone can touch Lily within my arms because she will be safe. Why do I say this? Well, there's a very big threat right now. I'm hoping that the Lord intervenes. Far greater, more severe than SARS. The coronavirus is now infiltrating a lot of nations in the world, and now we've declared an emergency, health emergency in America itself. And people are so scared, will the market crash? What will happen? People are just dropping dead in Wuhan, where the virus started. When things like this happen in the world, where you have no power at all to control circumstances, the only safe place you can be is to run into the arms of God. Unlike the delusion of Belshazzar, thinks that man-made walls and man-made institutions and powers can protect you, and he eventually fell. We understand that only the walls of God's grace and sovereignty and love that covers us will be the only secure position that we can be in. So if there's a message I'd like to bring to you, you know that Christ is inviolable. You cannot violate Christ in your decadence, in your delusion, even in your downfall. But the positive message is, if you're in Jesus Christ, nothing can touch you. 1,000 will fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but they will never come near you because you're in Jesus Christ. I hope as we end, you will find that security in Jesus, the way we've learned his sovereignty in the study this afternoon. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear Father, thank you for this fascinating story of Belshazzar in Daniel 5. I pray that we will learn our lesson, that You are not mocked. Whatever we sow, we will reap. And we can try it. All the world's institutions and all of us can try it. But Christ cannot be violated in our decadence, in our delusions, even in our downfall, in our defeat. Teach us to find our security only in Jesus. And by doing that, dear Father, may we be secure even with the threat of things beyond our control, because we know that you are always in control. And if we are in you, we will be in control through your power and your grace. Be with the teachers and those who will be studying the lesson for this coming week. May the same security and peace be with them as we open these words in our studies. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.